Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer Our Demigods. For some apparently unknown reason, this year's crop of initiates is an exceptionally large one. Hot with the increase of supply, there is a tremendous decrease in market valuation, and really at this time the supply of initiates greatly exceeds the demand. It must be a grand and glorious feeling to be an initiate, so far, far above the rest of humanity that only occasionally the world is seen through a rift in the clouds. But we fear it must be rather chilly and lonely up there, and the rarefied atmosphere must be trying upon the lungs of our enlightened. It may be this mental or spiritual strain that is responsible for some of the peculiar things they do. There are at the present time a number of high priests of sundry and varied shrines, cults, isms, oxys, etc., who bestow upon you various initiations for various considerations. Let me introduce to you the fruitage of one of these marvelous processes, the Right Honorable Diomedes Sourdough, C.D. F.B. S. S. R.F.D. P. R.S.V.P. I. U.B.V.D. This individual is an initiate of the first water, exceptionally brilliant, a member of everything, and a leading authority on a large variety of subjects. He spends quite a percentage of his time preparing for his degrees, and the rest of the time getting over them. He admits that he is an initiate and can show you checkbook stubs to prove it. He bestows initiation himself by the laying on of hands and exhorting the most terribly binding oath to the Lord's know-what. From all over the surface of the earth people come to gain wisdom at his feet. Mr. Dub came from Arkansas, Mr. and Mrs. Simp from Rhode Island, Betty Boob from North Dakota, and Willie from Utah. All of these entered into the occult path under the guidance and guardianship of our much alphabet friend Professor Sourdough. Professor writes books, meets with an inner circle, and is perfectly willing to be admired. But really, this person has read a few good books and is capable of delivering a rational lecture on several subjects. But when a careful analysis is made of him and the acid test applied, he turns green. He would have been a very successful teacher and a great help to humanity if two things had not occurred. First, someone told him he was an initiate, and secondly, he believed it. There are several of our leading occult schools that have installed spiritual mimeographs in order to keep up with the ever-advancing and unfolding efficiency system, a sort of an occult sausage machine into one end of which are poured perfectly respectable citizens, and out the other end of which comes a never-ending stream of overstuffed sausages. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. A trip to Europe or some distant country is almost certain to result in an initiation, especially if you go to the right parties, and within the last few years thousands of promising students have been turned into self-conceited puppies by a set process of initiation. Briefly, it is as follows. An individual who does not know tells another individual what he does not care anything about, then amputates one extremity from the bankroll, and this constitutes the essence of the ceremony. Initiate number 1 is a dope fiend, an inveterate smoker, and one of his best pictures shows him tenderly embracing one of the Vestal virgins of his temple. Number 2 has been tied up in so many scandalous enterprises that it is absolutely impossible to list them separately, but suspect him of anything you want to and you are sure to hit it. Initiate number 3 carries a sideline in oil stock. Initiate number 4 is wanted for bigamy in 3 states. Initiate number 5 is wanted on sundry strange charges, while initiate number 6 will have to explain several things to the government which does not care much for him nowadays. Go right straight down the calendar of the 10 Commandments and we can produce, with very little research work, an initiate who is morally if not physically breaking each one of them. And on the advice with which they delight the heart of the seeker, and owe the esoteric instructions which they launch upon an unsuspecting world. Let us cite some examples of it. In the esoteric instructions to pupils written by one of these deluded individuals, we find the following suggestion as a very excellent means of developing clairvoyance, which, by the way, is not a legitimate spiritual aim but is only legitimate as the result of the living of a pure life. But this individual gives the following process for the attainment of this supernatural vision, the unfoldment of soul qualities, and so forth. Take a mirror and hang on your wall so that when you are sitting down the center of the mirror is on a level with your eyes. You are to put a lighted candle on each side of the mirror and then gaze into it until something happens. This is an exceptionally choice piece. What would the shades of the immortals have to say about it? If you look into this mirror long enough you will see things. One student tried it, became hypnotized by his own eyes, could not look away from the mirror, and finally, frothing at the mouth, fell in convulsions. This is purely the result of the blind leading the blind, but people have done it and are doing it. They sit down every night and gaze in a piece of glass because the person who outlined the instruction claimed to be the one and only true initiate, the Lord High Mogul of this, that and their thing, and the Lord Amir most everything. Leaving this one to gaze in his magic mirror, we pass on to the next one. Henry Brown was a promising boy, and a marvelous student of things supernatural. His lectures were clean-cut and interesting, his work was filled with promise, and there was no reason to doubt that one of these days in the normal tenor of things he would become at least an initiate of the lower orders. But this person was talked out of his straight and narrow way by one of those near initiates who received him into some deep and mysterious order which he swallowed whole. He now returns to the field of his labors absolutely useless, honestly believing that he is an initiate. All that we have now of our once promising possibility is a narrow-minded, highbrow fop who looks down with benign condescension upon the world at large. And so it goes wherever we look. Every little while someone comes up to us and points out some long-eared bewhiskered individual, whispering confidentially in our ear, "SHHH. He is an initiate." When we mildly ask who told them so, they usually answer, "Oh, he admits it." Of all the occult teachers who have come to the world in late years, there are 2 who admitted before the world that they were just students, hoping with their own pupils that someday they would attain to the divine light. It would not be well to name them here, but they were great because they claimed nothing for themselves and only worked silently, quietly, and simply for the good of the cause. All over the face of the earth strange individuals are being attacked with illusions, delusions, and confusions. The reincarnation of the Holy Ghost is now loose while there are hundreds preaching the one and only truth, all different. Each one is being sponsored by a master, and each one starts in by making a liar out of all the rest. And so it goes. We are producing in occultism a generation of delirious demigods who will never be of any real good to anybody until they get down off their high horses and come back to earth, where they are chained by every possible tie. If students could only learn to realize that to be a good student is as worthy as to be an initiate, and that when they live honestly with themselves they are far closer to the light than when they put on long robes, chant mantras, and act like a lot of 10-year-old children on Halloween. They are disgracing the very thing which they should be defending as above human comparison. The greatest insult that the average man can heap upon occult science is to claim to understand it, and least of all to represent it. When Mr. Gutenberg claims to be an initiate, while his relatives and friends know positively that he has not taken a bath in 5 years, that he chews tobacco, is seldom sober, and is eternally mixed up in domestic problems, and several similar things, he is not glorifying himself by his claims, but is simply making a joke out of the thing he claims to be, and is literally, if not intentionally, advertising the fact to the world that intemperance is the path to mastery, and that being a sot is necessary to immortality. The whole thing is a joke, but it is a very crude one, a blasphemous one, and the average self-ordained initiate is a living lie, both to himself and the great doctrines which he claims to represent. Those who claim nothing do not have to live up to anything in order to be true to their claims, but when they stand before the world as examples of finished products, what happens to our scintillating, Royal Dresden initiate? Their faults show all the more because they claim to be without them, and they are all the more ridiculous because of their sanctimonious hypocrisy. It is only one person's opinion, of course, but we admit freely we do not have much use for them. When we see our leading initiates concentrating upon nice juicy beefsteaks or surrounded by cigarette stubs, we are convinced of one of two things: either that occultism is a joke, or else they are. We prefer to think it is dying latter. We do not say, necessarily, that they should live any better. That is their problem. But this we do say: if they do not intend to live any better, they have no right to claim to be that which they obviously are not, and in this way bring reflection against a noble cause. We are very fond of retiring initiates who obliterate their presence in bashful reticence, but when they come out with brass bands and a torchlight parade, we are inclined to be a little skeptical. When the world applauds them, we are quite confident that they are no good hut. When they applaud themselves, we gird up our garments and depart, for such is not done in the better regulated circles. There may be 1 or 2 initiates out of the thousands who claim to be, but we doubt even that percentage. The real initiates will always be found to be men and women without claims, and we have no knowledge of the fact that he ever bestowed a degree upon anyone. The average worker in occult lines is only expressing an opinion, and he does not know whether that opinion is so or not. It is his privilege to express that opinion, but it is not his privilege to use the name of the initiates for the furtherance of said opinion. Such action is forgery. The masters do not retaliate to these insults, they remain silent and unknown, in this way proving their mastery, while the pseudo-initiates spend all their time accepting glory. The true teachers are willing that they should receive it, but must smile to themselves when they see the self-conceited egotists accepting the laurels of another man's work. Dreams. For many days I lay helpless in my bed, recovering from the cuts and bruises I had received in the unaccountable accident. This enforced rest proved to be of untold value, for it had been many months since I had completely relaxed. The strain and stress of my ever-growing work had been more of a pressure than I had realized, for my struggle to advance and show the way to others and at the same time resist those at my back who would hold me behind had been a fight both ways. So in my weakened physical state I had many hours in which to reflect upon the past months that had whirled by so quickly, and to also ponder some upon the future. After a day or two of the most considerate and solicitous nursing, I was restored enough to take more notice of my surroundings and wonder to whom I owed such generous treatment. So far I had only been dreamily conscious of the presence of someone busily performing their duties, and had only seen passing back and forth before my eyes the motherly figure of the old Welsh woman. But as soon as I was able to formulate my thoughts and collect my words enough to make myself heard, I began asking questions of my companion. Not that I felt at all worried or anxious, for I was too comfortably at rest, but with the half-indifference of semi-consciousness I just lazily questioned her. She proved to be rather non-committal, but I soon gathered that I was on the estate of Lady Patricia March, a young noblewoman who lived alone in this small country manor house with the old Welsh woman as her only companion. When I asked what physician had attended me, the reply was still rather unsatisfactory, but by piecemeal I gathered that there had not been one, and that Lady Patricia was herself quite proficient in the art of healing. During this rather enforced communication the door opened softly, and a young woman entered the room. I stared wonderingly at her pale, fair face and guessed that she was Patricia. The name so suited one so noble-looking. "How is the patient, Maria?" she asked the nurse, ignoring my questioning look, and she was gentle-voiced. From the moment she had entered the door a calm, soothing restfulness seemed to pervade the room, and at the sound of her low-toned voice I had a sudden desire to sleep. Slowly a peaceful drowsiness crept over me, and I dropped into a deep, healing slumber. And this was the beginning of a series of wonderful dreams. Each time I awakened from one of these calm, restful sleeps I could remember a beautiful dream, a dream that seemed to be a wonderful object lesson played out in picture-like detail for my observation. It was as though I took no part in them, and yet the central figure in each, who passed through so many adventures, seemed to be my own soul. As my eyes closed sleepily, a thin path stretched out like a ribbon, winding through valleys and over hills, around great masses of broken rock, and through dark forest where singing birds fluttered across the gloomy arches. This road wound through the veil of form and onward and upward underscore to an end that no man knows, for none who have walked that silver thread have come back to tell of the mysteries that lie over the edge of the hills of eternity. Along this path a pilgrim wound his way, leaning upon a palmer's staff. Every now and again he would shade his eyes with his hands, searching for the end of that twisting, winding path. For many years he had walked that road and seen its forks where others joined it, tiny paths, mere footways seldom walked, were they. But the pilgrim knew that all these narrow ways led to the mighty road for which he was searching, the one that had no name or parting and wound onward into the very sky itself. On and on the pilgrim went, stopping now and again at some wayside shrine where he knelt in prayer. Over the top of mighty mountains, through the depths of valleys bordered by towering cliffs and broken crags, the pilgrim journeyed, and at last one afternoon as the sun was sinking, a ball of flaming light amid the fleecy clouds of the west, he reached the foot of a lofty cliff. Here he saw a fine, white path winding along its mighty sides to the very top. He stopped and gazed in awe, then fell upon his knees, for instead of ending on the mountain top, the winding road kept right on up, into the heavens. It twisted and wound like a mighty spiral thread. The pilgrim fancied that it passed from star to star until finally lost in the infinitude of eternity. Eagerly he pressed onward, longing to travel that mystic way leading upward to the heavens. Slowly the shadows grew around him as he entered another grove of sacred trees. A chill weighed upon the wanderer's heart. Those mighty ones of the forest that rose above him seemed like great ghosts or priests of old, standing in silent adoration, reaching their branches heavenward in silent prayer. As he listened, the swaying of the wind among their leafy crests seemed like the chant of a mystic choir, and a great stillness entered his being. Moving on, scarce breathing, he finally reached a mighty arch of white stone which barred his way. The road passed under the arch with its gates of iron and seemed to end in a wondrous white chapel that nestled like some jewel of snowy crystal amidst the dark carbon of the forest. As the pilgrim stopped before this gate, wondering how he could go on, a low creaking sound was heard and the massive portal swung open as though moved by unseen hands, and a great inspiration drew him onward, leading him through and up the marble steps that led to the mystic chapel. The door of this swung open also, and in awe and reverence the pilgrim entered and stared around. He stood in a circular chamber, all finished in pure white marble. The floor of inlaid stones and mosaic seemed like trodden snow, and from it rose pillars of pure Carrara which upheld the mighty dome. Before him rose a shrine, and under the shrine a little doorway scarce higher than his waist, and through this open portal the palmer saw the path continuing. What place is this? He thought as he gazed upon the shrine, whose soft white curtains were closed, concealing he knew not what. As if in answer, a voice replied, "This is the shrine of the bleeding heart." The pilgrim turned, and behind him stood an old man, his white hair encircled by a band of shining gold, and his gray beard falling upon the robe he wore. His garment hung from the shoulders and was of the same colorless white as the temple around him. "What mean you, master?" asked the pilgrim, bowing humbly at the feet of the aged man. "This," answered the Shining One, "is the place of tribulation. Many there are who walk the way of silver light that you have come, but few have passed beyond this point. Before you the winding path which marks the way of a mortal life goes upward to the feet of the divine, but he who would walk it must find the key that is hidden in this chapel. See the door that is open before you, how small it is and how low? Like the eye of the needle is this pathway, and none may pass save those who bow. You now stand at the doorway of immortality. For those who pass this portal go on into the infinite and are of earth no more. Come, let me show you the shrine." The aged man led the mortal one across the room, and as they came near, the silken curtains parted, and a great ray of glorious light blinded the seeker. As he grew accustomed to the brilliance and dared to gaze into the mystic recess, he saw, quivering and pulsating in the sacred niche, a living heart from which poured streamers of golden light. "Master, what is that?" asked the pilgrim in awe. "That, my son, is the bleeding heart, the guardian of the sacred doorway. None shall pass this point save they be anointed of the drops of blood that pour from this mystic shrine. You cannot approach the door, for the light will blind you. So this guardian stands, and to you, O man of earth, if left the riddle how to pass this mystic shrine. The pilgrim sought to press forward, but the light drove him back, and the great glowing, pulsating heart seemed to grow greater as he sought to near the infinite. Master, I cannot pass. Where shall I find the key to this mystery? The old one shook his head. That is for you to know and not mine to disclose, he answered kindly. As the wanderer stood, his head bowed in sorrow that his path should end thus, a strange dizziness came over him and the room swayed and rocked. Things grew dim about him, and the old man's face seemed to swim in a sea of light. Slowly shadows fell, the white temple faded away, the mountain with the path into the stars dissolved, and the pilgrim found himself standing upon the same endless road that stretched for miles before him and was lost in the shadows behind. What way shall I go now to reach the light? He murmured, gazing around in sorrow. From somewhere a voice seemed to whisper, "Go on, go on." And slowly he began again that endless wandering to the very furthermost part of creation, praying that he might again find the point where the road passed into the stars. His torn, bleeding feet leaving their tracks of blood upon the path, the pilgrim wandered on, and at last fell for a moment's rest beside another wayside shrine. Is there no end to these wanderings? He mutely asked, gazing up at the crucified one hung in the little alcove. From the dying figure came the echo to his question, "Is there no end?" For years I have walked the way faithfully and truly. Each turn of this road whispers that the end is near, but when I reach the bend it stretches out as endless as before. Everywhere I have sought my God and His light, everywhere I find a promise that fades as I approach. Many a night I have seen a wondrous city shine out from the skies on the top of some distant mountain, but when I climb its lofty sides and fall exhausted, the vision fades away only to be built again upon some other distant peak. Alone, with none to give a word of cheer, with none to understand, O God. Must it be forever? Again the figure upon the cross echoed back his words, alone with none to give a word of cheer, with none to understand, O God. Must it be forever? As the pilgrim knelt there, his heart broken and bleeding, a tottering form slowly approached the shrine and, falling, stretched weak hands towards the crucifix that it contained. He was an old man, and his raiment was torn and tattered, his face deeply lined with sorrow turned in despair to the cross, and slowly dragging himself along he reached the foot of the tiny shrine. "This is the end," he murmured. "It seems ages that I have sought, but I can go on no more. And here, brother, when I am gone, lay me to rest here beneath the crucifix." The young one turned, and a feeling no mortal man can express filled his soul as he gazed at the dying form. "No, no, my brother," he cried, "have courage. I too have wandered long and suffered much. I know what you have been through and how the miles seem without an end, for I have walked them also. But courage, brother, for I see now what I never saw before. Something within me that has cried many a long year is loosened, something whispers that has long been silent. My heart too was broken, but as the iron fingers closed upon it a new world opened to me, for out of it escaped a gleam of light that shows me the way of the wise. Come, brother, Let me help you, and we shall yet find the light. For see, round yonder curve a gleam of light appears. I am sure that this indeed is the end of the way." The old man looked, and a new hope filled his eyes. "Indeed, I see it also," he whispered. "Come, let us go on." He rose, and his tottering steps seemed strengthened for a moment as he pressed forward towards the light, but just as he reached the curve, with his hands outstretched, he fell forward upon his face and lay still. The pilgrim himself, rushing towards that gleam, stopped and wavered for a second, and then turned back to the form that held out a hand weakly. "No, brother, I will not leave you. I have suffered as you have suffered and will stay with you, for well I remember the agony I went through when none would stop." Reaching the side of the old man, he knelt down and, lifting the aged head upon his knee, tried to soothe the sufferer, unheeding the fact that but a moment before he had himself been dying of a broken heart. As he knelt there, he did not see that the great trees around him with their massive pillars were slowly turning white. He did not realize that the swaying branches that linked overhead were turning into a dome of marble. Hot as he knelt, the figure before him slowly faded away, and with a cry of amazement the pilgrim rose to his feet and gazed around. He was again in the temple, Hot this time alone. He looked towards the shrine of Bleeding Heart. It was empty. The little door below it was open before him, and a voice seemed to tell him to go on. Reaching the little gate, he knelt down, and bowing in humility passed through. Before him the path led up to the stars, and with hands crossed upon his breast he started up a path that seemed like jewels and diamonds glistening in a spiritual sun. Gazing down at his garments, he found that they were not those that he had been wearing, but were of white. Obeying an impulse, he raised his hands to look at them. They were covered with blood, and twisting and gleaming between his fingers was the bleeding heart which had been on the shrine, while behind him stretched a fine thread of blood that marked the path he had been walking. A voice said, "That is the key." The economic problem. The problem of human equality is ever confronting us. The Master Jesus said, "The poor ye have with you always," and technically this is true. There will never be a time in nature when all things shall be equal. The only equality is when things are equal to themselves. Just as there is childhood, manhood, and old age, birth, growth and decay, so there are three stages in the progression of consciousness through matter. There are three grand divisions of organic quality in bodies. Two things are necessary for expression in matter, and all expression is limited by these two things. First, organic quality, and second, size. Size is the measurement of power. All things being equal, size without high organic quality produces the brute, and organic quality without size produces those sensitive individuals who seldom live to great age, because the fine-grained quality cannot be supported by a small, undeveloped body. As long as there is difference in organic quality and size, there cannot be equality in mental or social position, because man's expression in this world is the direct result of the power which consciousness is exerting over matter. Where the organic quality is low, consciousness is low, and the brain is incapable of fine, discriminating thought. Such persons must follow instead of lead, for the very structure of their organism inhibits intelligent leadership. When such individuals do rise to power, we have the Marat, the Robespierre, the Napoleon, or the radical who is incapable of reflective thought himself and refuses to credit reflective thought in others. Man has an impossible golden dream which he has fostered for a long time, and that is that he is going to tear down the so-called caste system, and that the man with the pick and shovel is going to sit in meditation with the sage, while the bricklayer is going to recline in the carven chairs of arrogance. This is a mistaken idea. The desire of the true ethical and social reformer does not rest upon these conditions at all. His cry is for opportunity, for the true philosopher realizes that opportunity is the divine birthright of all living creatures, and he also knows that the modern economic situation does not give every man an honest opportunity. The average reformer, however, becomes Bolshevistic. He is not satisfied with an opportunity but demands affluence as his birthright, and the average soapbox orator along these lines would be more arrogant and despotic than those he condemns if the goddess of finance ever smiled upon him. The sweatshops, child labor, and similar institutions are depriving man of his birthright, and as such should go, and with them depart the greatest curse of modern civilization. But the abolishment of these things will not equalize human intelligence. The thing it will do is give man an opportunity to unfold himself according to what he is, but he is always limited in two ways. First, by surrounding environments, secondly, by organic quality. Man's greatest hindrance is not a heartless world but a useless body. Useful bodies are not built in days or years but in ages and lives. Organic quality cannot be improved by politics, it can only be improved by man as an individual when he makes the most of every opportunity to improve himself mentally, spiritually, and physically while he lives. There is a caste system in nature. In the universe there is the upper and the lower set, divided from each other by the ideals and works of life and by the conscientious effort of each individual. Man must learn to be contented to live in accordance with what he is, and yet at the same time be ambitious to improve his lot. The hope of the universe is not in ranting and raving for equal rights, but in the burning of the midnight oil. When we see the laborer come from his labors, tired, surrounded by the crying needs of family and friend, but who sits alone under the light, studying to improve himself, working with tired, chapped fingers roughened with toil to become a man among men, to learn the things which divide ignorance from wisdom, such a one is the hope of salvation. Such a one will become in the due course of nature's time a spiritual aristocrat, and, naturally, there will come to him his birthright of being a thinker, a doer, and a superior. Then we see his companion in labor, one who does not take the somber course of study and thought, but throws bricks at the houses of aristocrats, hating them because their skins are white while his are tanned, their voices soft while his is harsh. He curses and spits at them, suffering in his hate. Such a one will never be the thing he longs to be, because the difference lies in quality and not in the strength of the bull or the beast within. If you entered two horses in a race, the one a dray such as is used to pull milk wagons, and the other a fine Arabian stallion, which would win the race? Just so, it is the same in the race for success. The dray horse is hampered by its own weight, and while it may dash forward madly with all the strength that is in it, it simply cannot race. No matter whether it is dragging a milk wagon or is a pedigreed horse, it is that type and there is no hope for it. But the Arabian stallion, without an effort, outdistances it with ease and grace and leaves it far behind. Man believes that with the power of his hand he can rule the world. He cannot. all he can do is tear civilization up by the roots and leave it for another thinker to repair. We will not deny that the poor have cause for dissension, just as they had during the French Revolution, for the mere fact that a man has a fine, executive brain does not prove that he is a humanitarian, a philanthropist, or an honest man, nor does organic quality necessarily indicate virtue. But one thing it always does give, and that is power. It may be that an assassin's bullets will slay a few, but in the end the power of mentality wins over the battle of brawn, and the only hope for those who are trampled on is to reach mental efficiency by means of which they can intelligently combat conditions. When we look carefully into the problem of economics, we strike one phase that is well worth our consideration. Those individuals who now spend their time trampling on the poor were in nearly every case poorly born themselves. They did not come from homes of wealth, and many of them never went to school. Some of our greatest millionaires today were newsboys without a chance. Others shined shoes and started in with 100% less than the average failure starts with. The heel of the capitalism of their day was upon their throats, and yet, with the sheer force of mental power, indomitable will, and perfect faith in themselves, they rose out of the mud and became masters of world affairs. Now, those left behind shake their fists at them, while the energy they use in railing would lift them also from the rut if it were exerted as their opponents exerted it. Man must learn to capitalize upon himself. His brain, his heart, and his hand are the most valuable assets he possesses. Incessant effort should be made to increase the efficiency of these assets, for in that alone lies liberation from the rut. When to this is added the realization of limitation, and the gradual unfoldment of powers as the means of liberation from this limitation, we have the man or woman who is going to be a success. The caste system of the world is as follows. The lowest phase is opposition, materialism, and the battling of beast instincts. In this world they are the ones chained by ages of thoughtlessness, or recent differentiation from lower races, to the lower physical side of life. Those who dwell in it are chained by like and dislike, by passions and appetites. They deify matter and know no God or consciousness outside of it. They settle their disputes with bullets and sandbags or with fist encounters. They are an ever-muttering horde, and in the last analysis are absolutely powerless. Their only weapon is firebrand or dagger, and these things have no force outside of physical substance, and as true consciousness is independent of substance, the most they can do is destroy their own world. The mere idea that such individuals could rule the universe is beyond reason or logic. They cannot do it, for there is not within their own beings enough self-control to rule themselves. There is no law or logic in them, and as the universe is ruled by law and logic, only those who have developed it are capable of governing. They cry out in their agony that they are imposed upon, and they are, for man has not yet gained that consciousness which enables him to be superior without becoming domineering. The reason, however, why they are imposed upon is not necessarily because their opponents are strong, but because they themselves are weak. The idea that this problem can be solved without intellectual growth on the part of this great mass is absurd. Their overlords realize that in this ignorance lies the power which they have over them. Therefore it seems that every day the higher oppress the lower more severely to prevent them from attaining light. But this oppression should only stimulate those oppressed to greater and more intelligent effort. The world must have those who work with their hands, but these will always have to serve the man who works with his head, while both must bow together before the one who is expressing the qualities of his spirit. The second stage is intellectualism, and it spends most of its time preying upon materialism. These are the minds that juggle the finance of the world, that lead, govern, and direct the mass, and regardless of what they may like or dislike, those who would lead or govern must join this second class. The great curse of intellectualism is oppression, for there are very few capable of realizing their power over others with attempting to exert it. This is the main cause of the sorrow of the masses. In other words, man's inhumanity to man. The intellectual individual should appoint himself as guardian and protector of those incapable of functioning on that plane, but instead of so doing he now harnesses them to his chariot and loads their backs with burdens. The only remedy for this is to awaken in him the realization of his responsibilities. The third division is that of the spiritual man, which is the principle of altruism and selflessness. There are but few who have consciously attained this degree. They are the great reformers, the great occultists and thinkers of our world, who have realized the oneness of things and have come to an understanding of the fact that while all cannot attain in one life the acme of their ideals, still man should not impose upon the weak, but rather should champion them and assist them to a fuller and more adequate position. We have an idea that we are living in civilized times, but this idea is eternally being shattered by every evident example of barbarism. Voltaire said, "I know I am among men because they are fighting. I know they are civilized because they fight so savagely." Our so-called evolved and developed peoples are at each other's throats. Our great inventors spend all their time learning how to kill, and competition has been crowned the life of trade. This is purely because man has accepted the science of economics as the worthwhile thing in life. It is undoubtedly the world's most foolish decision. Man must not deify this problem as he does, because in nature it holds the least important place. Neither must we reject the economic problem. It is to be neither accepted nor rejected, and under no conditions assumed. It is merely here as an examination or test of the consciousness of man. In other words, it exists only to be solved. The wonderful Hindu race as a nation has never accepted the economic problem as worthy of consideration, and of course they did not have to in the time of their glory, for economics have always been a secondary consideration in the Orient. The modern problem did not confront the ancient races, and yet they were far better able to meet it than we are. The masters did not live in the day when caste was king. They needed only to seat themselves upon the ground, and their people gathered around them. When they wanted a house, they built it where they chose and lived in it, while if they were tired of the bustle of the world, they entered a cave in the hills. If they possessed no sandals, it was perfectly fashionable to go barefoot, and they never met the great inconveniences of modern congestion. As a result of their freedom, we find primitive brotherhood, many examples of which are far more beautiful than the products of our modern ethics. The Masonic school symbolizes the stages of unfoldment as the three ages of man: youth, maturity, and old age. The ages of the soul are the same. There are in the world today young souls and old bodies, and old souls and young bodies. Youth goes out to conquer the world. Manhood is content to have sufficient for his needs, while old age renounces the world as an illusion. We may call youth the material man, adultness the intellectual man, old age the spiritual man. Applying the economic problem, we may say, to the material man it is all, to the intellectual man it is a problem, to the spiritual man it is an illusion. To the ancients the economic problem was a phase, to the modern mind with its greed and ambition it is an all-absorbing reality. The young soul starts out on its journey in matter as an egotist, and the keynote of its consciousness is to acquire, regardless of cost it must own, master, and break all other things. This is the key to the economic problem, which in the average mind becomes merely a series of processes for acquirement. The old soul has no economic problem, for it has ceased to desire to acquire, for eyes growing dim to material things have begun to see the reality hidden behind the veil. The old soul realizes that we are here to master problems as they are presented by nature, and are never to dally with them but to go straight through to a successful conclusion. There are over 1,000 solutions to the modern economic problem, but when applied they are all at best only partial solutions, and the great key problem remains unsolved. Many of us would like to wander with Plato and Aristotle over the mountains of eternity, but we are forcibly drawn back again into the world by the economic needs. We are forced to leave our philosophy and go back into the world, both as teachers and pupils, to earn the money for our daily bread. India solved the problem of education in the face of economic difficulties by dividing the life of man into 3 epochs. The first 25 years he was supported by his parents and usually graduated from one of the many universities which, in the days of India's glory, made it the most highly educated country in the world. During his youth, provision was made for his life. He was prepared to think for himself in a rational and sensible way. Then came the second 25 years, during which he married and brought up his children, begging them to a position where they could take care of themselves, and saving up sufficient to provide for his own old age and those dependent on him. Then during the third part of his life he retired from the bustle of the commercial world and devoted his entire time to study and philosophy and the solution of life's problems, supported either by that which he had saved or the assistance of his children. The entire economic problem of the physical universe is an expression of matter, and the solution to it can be found in human anatomy, where 3 worlds of consciousness express themselves in the menta, emotional, and physical centers of the body. A civilization based on the lower man would express all the qualities of the animal instincts. For example, a carving from Mexico linking this country with ancient Egypt, accompanied by a marvelous description from the pen of a famous geologist, was presented to a newspaper for publication. It was thrown into the wastebasket while 10 columns were given to a murder, because the human animal reads only that in which he is interested, and while man is so attuned he is interested only in the loves, joys, hates and fears of animal consciousness. The same is true on each one of the 3 planes. We see all things with the eyes built of the organic quality of our vehicles. In man's anatomy there are 4 elements: earth, water, fire and air, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen and oxygen, mediums through which the universe manifests concretely. In the economic problem there are 4 elements: land, transpiratory, exchange and integrity, which are the basis of economics. Land corresponds to the physical body of man or the principle of earth and is the skeleton of economics, The second, or water element, corresponds to the etheric body of man, and in economics is the problem of transportation, which consists of the drawing of raw materials to advantageous markets. The third element of fire, or medium of exchange, is the astral body, with the heart in its center, and the Christ, the sun principle, is its lord, ruling through the metal gold, which is at the present time the medium of exchange. The fourth element is air, the mental quality, and in the economic problem, the integrity of the buyer and seller. These four constitute the body of the economic problem. Man tries to solve the problem of this body by placing one part over the other as master, while the intelligent, spiritualized individual realizes that all of these are vehicles for the expression of something else. There will be no end to the economic difficulties until the quality of the soul rises out of the four elements of body and transmutes the present masters into the servants that they should be. There is no cure-all to apply to any world problem. These great tests of the intelligence of man must be met individually and mastered individually. Power remains in the hands of those who are able to wield it, whether for good or ill, and the surest way to equalize power is for each human being to prove worthy of that power. When all men have earned the right to think, they can think. But there is no glory in attacking the thinker of today, save in one way: the thoughts of the modern thinker are selfish, egotistic, and enslaving. Let the new thinkers, born out of the darkness of their present sorrow, turn not around and oppress the oppressor, which is the temperament of the best, but let them show the superiority which they have gained by being charitable where others were not, by being noble where others were not, by being true where others were false, and in this way fulfill the dictates of true civilization. This universal understanding, based upon the realization of universal need, is the only permanent answer to any great problem. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth, new videos on a daily basis.